Well, we've escaped again. It turns out there was not much of a typhoon here. There wasn't a typhoon here, but there was enough rain for me to stay in the mountain lair and listen to last week's music, and it was a pretty good week otherwise. How about you, Russ? Russ is back, by the way, in the mountain lair.
That's right. I went from the American mountain lair to the Japanese mountain lair.
Right.
And we hadn't had many typhoons this season, so I thought, oh, we'll be fine. And as soon as I started looking at my flight coming back, there was a typhoon heading this way. And I thought I might not make it back so easily, but this was a really strange typhoon.
Yeah.
Normally they pass through in a day or two once they hit land, but this one took its sweet time meandering around. And although it hit Kyushu really hard with rain, we got lucky. It sort of zigzagged south, and now it's heading up on the other side of us. Just a little bit of rain and no wind here. So
it's almost like there was one of those like domes built around where we live, and it just kind of
Yeah, we were protected this time.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but it was good. So my house is still standing. I'm very happy about that.
I feel sorry for those who experienced the flooding and things, but we were lucky enough to escape.
Yeah.
Any bad effects this time, and I'm sure there'll be some more before the end of the season. So,
Well, we're inland and pretty far from the river, so I could, because I'm by the mountains here, so I can get flooding as possible, or avalanches.
Or landslides.
Landslides. That'd be horrible.
Don't want that.
There have been floods here since I've moved in, so it makes a big mess. It doesn't get in the house, though, thankfully, so, or at least it hasn't yet.
Typhoons and earthquakes, all part of the fun of living in Japan.
Yeah, there you go. If you're looking for adventure.
Anyway, we're back and ready to go, going through a lot more summer music releases here on Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This is going to be episode 179.
Wow, almost at 180.
Almost. 6 recordings as usual, bringing you the best new releases in classical and jazz music. Before we get into this week's program, I want to give a big thanks to trumpeter Jonathan Powell for sharing our episode from last week. He shared it both on Facebook and Instagram. And if you haven't heard it yet, make sure that you check out his Mambo Jazz Party recording on Circle 9 Records. Some very exciting Latin jazz and awesome trumpet playing on there.
It was fun. I might have to pick that up on a CD. I'll have to see.
And if you haven't heard last week's episode, there's 3 great trumpet recordings on there. Trumpet Divertimento.
Right. Trumpet Divertimento was the episode title.
So go back and check that out if you missed it. And in this week's episode, as always, in the description you can find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the music that we'll discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. You can listen to the podcast there as well if you want to get everything in one place. Now, our podcast is hosted on just about every podcast site you can think of, but they don't all look as pretty as the next. If you can't see the full description or recording list, or the links are not easy to access for the recordings, you can always come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Everything is easy to follow there. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow us or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend or musicians that you know. And if you take a moment and give us a ranking or write a review, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations. We could use a few more reviews on the Apple Podcasts app. We haven't got any in a while, so if you have a moment and you listen to us there, please write down some kind words for us. Also, come over and follow us on our Facebook page. You can get extra info, see some new releases throughout the week. I put up a bunch of them in the last 2 weeks in jazz because there's a lot of good stuff that has come out. You can leave a message or a comment there as well, see our interaction with the artists. And if you want to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'll be playing musical samples from these recordings tonight, and here is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists.
I guess we're just going to get right into it tonight. There's nothing else in news in the music world, really, that we need to talk about.
No bad news or good news to report, yeah.
No news is good news, as they say. So, and the good news, of course, is that we have 3 new classical recordings coming up. And the first, we're going to get into the, post-Baroque, pre-classical era with a recording of string quintets by Luigi Boccherini, Italian composer who lived in Spain. The recording is called Fandango. String quintets. It's always a great title. Just call your...
I like that word, yeah.
We might have to get that in the title this week.
Yeah, let's work on that.
We'll try to work Fandango into the episode title. Okay, this is a recording by La Ritirata, and the artistic director is Josetxu Obregón. And this is on the Glossa label, released on August 16th. Okay, now, Boccherini, Italian composer, but like Domenico Scarlatti before him in the Baroque era, Boccherini spent a substantial part of his life living in Spain, and his string quintets were primarily composed while he was in the service of the Infante Don Luis Antonio de Bourbon, who was brother of the Spanish king Carlos III. And after the Infante died, Boccherini continued his compositional activity in Madrid itself. Now, Italians like to talk about Boccherini as being one of the great composers, and they like to compare him to Mozart. Boccherini was a pretty great composer, but Mozart wound up sort of cementing the way that Western classical music was going to go in that era and afterwards, and he was a big influence on Beethoven. Boccherini, on the other hand, is taking his cue from people like Vivaldi. Descriptive features take precedence over formal components. Now, in Mozart, the formal components are the more important parts, and that's what makes Mozart's music so exciting, is that he manages to create these almost harmonic, like magic tricks in order to keep the form intact while he's going off in these odd harmonic directions. In Boccherini's music, we don't hear that. We hear a lot of description, and I think that kind of colors our opinion of his music because we're educated into the whole formal element. Anyway, La Ritirata features Josetxu Obregón on cello, Hiro Kurosaki on violin, Miriam Hontana on violin, Daniel Lorenzo on viola, and Ismael Campanero on double bass. And there are 2 more members who I'll mention when they appear.
Yeah, and that's what makes these kind of unique, the bass, right?
The bass, right. String quintet will usually have 2 cellos. On occasion, you'll get 2 violas. But here we have a double bass, and that really does add a lot of punch to the low end. Now, in Boccherini's case, he's not... This is another innovation of Haydn's and Mozart's. In Haydn and Mozart, all of the instruments are equal. So they're all playing melodies. They'll get handed off the melody. Not the case in these Boccherini string quintets. The double bass is always accompanimental. It's sort of almost taking on the role of the old continuo. But it does add some punch and things like that. Anyway, the most formal work we have here is the first one on the album, tracks 1 through 3, string quintet number 73 in B-flat major, composed in 1787. Now you got to keep in mind, at this point, Mozart's really at his peak. He's coming to the end. He had 4 more years to live, but he's really at his peak in Vienna during the 1780s. All right, this is for 2 violins, viola, cello, and contrabbasso obbligato, so double bass. So the double bass provides harmonic support, and the work starts with a movement andante lento, and it's got an elegant lilt to it. So let's just start with that and put you in this sound world. Let's hear a sample. All right, I'm not going to give you the resolve there, but we heard going into that darker minor area. So as you notice, the recording is clear and bright sounding with detail emerging brilliantly. Lines are all well shaped and the tempo is ideal for this piece. The ensemble are also sensitive to harmonic changes. They give this kind of an elegant feel. It really sounds like an early Haydn work. It's in that sort of style. The ensemble, as you notice, are sensitive to harmonic changes too. We heard that turn into the more darker minor there in that melody. And they make sure the darkening feel registers via light accents and retards, or slowing down. At 1 minute and 25 seconds, there's a new section, a bit livelier, to provide contrast, and the opening returns just after the 2-minute mark. At 2 minutes and 50 seconds, we hear themes from the second section again, and then a final repeat of the opening at about 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The second movement, Allegro Vivo, tempo di minuetto, this movement starts without a pause, and it's much livelier and chirpier than the first, played with energy of an elegant sort. The ensemble seems adamant in not losing the elegant feel in this work, and that's fine. They do generate a sense of activity without overdoing the tempo. Let's hear a sample of the opening here. And we get to a new section there. There's a rather nice false cadence that leads into a more morose tempo and harmony, the grave of the tempo markings above, but that's exited from by some ebullient, rising unison lines, and we hear the opening material again in all its energy. The third and final movement is a rondeau, marked allegro non tanto, and then there's a minuetto, and then the rondeau comes back. Again, no pause. This starts with an interesting sped-up bass line deliberately played. There's something of a mechanical clock to the rhythm, though it speeds up once a sense of motion is gained. It's sort of like it's trying to gain its feet and then it's off on its way. Let's hear this. One of the things that keeps me listening to classical music, it helps me hold on to the rhythms of nature. You know, as we go into this whole digital age where everything is virtual now, when we live our lives in a computer, there's almost no rhythm to it at all, you know? Even the 20th century, all its machine rhythms, you know, even that sort of, you know, brings me out of the computer and puts me back into the time I at least grew up in. In Boccherini's time, these are the rhythms of, like, just natural life, animals, birds. We'll hear more of that later. Anyway, in this work, there are some lovely rising lines in the violin after 1 minute and 30 seconds that gently squeak into its top range. It comes across as rather cute in a good way. The feelings in this piece are all light, even in the slower sections. I really enjoyed the presence of the double bass at 3 minutes and 50 seconds, bowing a deep pedal point and adding unexpected texture. The music then starts chirping again, the higher strings playing close to the bridge and getting at the edge of the sul ponticello sound. It's subtle, but I liked it. It wouldn't have been an effect that would have been used too often at the time. At the end, we hear that the high violin is squeaking out its top notes again. After that, we reach a false cadence. The rondo theme starts up again to bring this elegant, cheerful movement to an end. I really liked this piece a lot. Okay, the title work, tracks 4 to 6, string quintet, number 77 in D major, Fandango. Okay, composed in 1788. This is Opus 40, number 2, or G341. The title refers to the second movement. I'll talk about it more when we get to it. On that track, David Mayoral plays castanets, so we have an extra musician here. Track 4, the first movement, Grave, it's very brief, and it features an attractive melody. It's sort of an introduction, and it winds up with some promise of what's to come. It really acts as an introduction to the Fandango movement, which we have on track 5, Tempo di Fandango. This is a dance in ternary rhythm, that's 3. Boccherini wrote in the manuscript that the movement imitates the fandango which El Padre Basilio plays on his guitar. Padre Basilio was the fraile Miguel Garcia who received special support from the king, Carlos IV. Anyway, Ritirata play this with a dance in its step. The theme works very well for the quintet. You can imagine the guitar figure, but all of the bowed strings sort of mask the guitar quality. If you know it's there, you could kind of zero in and hear it. I have to say this performance, elegant and beautifully shaped as it is, really doesn't put across the excitement of this dance. We hear the castanets from around 1 minute and 30 seconds, and I'm going to sample from when they're finally in the mix. Okay, beautifully shaped lines, good balance, but I really feel like sparks should be flying out of that, and they really aren't. But that's okay. It is a good performance. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds, the cello gets some time in the spotlight with the rhythm. Then the main Fandango theme comes back. The movement ends with a long, drawn-out note that suggests the rhythm and dance might go on longer. And track 6 is a minuetto, and then a trio. The minuet is on the fast side, probably to match the Fandango. The movement, of course, has all of the cadences we would expect from a minuet and serves to stabilize the entire work. The Fandango movement having a more sort of continuing, whirling sort of quality to it. So you don't really get a sense of stability from that. Like it just feels like it's speeding up all the time. And here we're more grounded. La Ritirata, I've already stated, goes for elegance in their playing, and that's the case here. There's beautiful balance of voices as well. The trio section is more centered in the low end of the ensemble, with the opening minuet returning to bring more variety to its tone. Now, I mentioned that Boccherini's music is going to be more descriptive, so we have here the Fandango theme played by the priest as being the descriptive element. In the next work, tracks 7 through 11, string quintet number 12, in D major, L'Uccelliera, opus 11 number 6, G276. Uccelliera means a birdhouse, and this refers to the Infante's aviary in Boadilla del Monte. This aviary has recently been restored, by the way. You can visit it today. I don't know if there are still birds in there, but the area is all intact. This quintet features 2 cellos, okay, so there's no double bass here. And the second cello is played by Amarilis Dueñas. All right, track 7. This is a 5-movement work. Track 7, Adagio Assai, the first movement, starts as a sort of entrance music. I guess we're walking into the aviary in this movement. Then it morphs into something more excitable at a quicker tempo for a brief moment. We go back to the slow tempo and into the next movement, labeled Allegro Giusto, track 8, movement 2. Now this movement evokes the chirping and trilling of some of the palace aviary birds, such as nightingales, goldfinches, quails, and cuckoos. Please, Boccherini is writing this for the Infante he's working for, and he's drawing like a musical picture of the birds. He's singling each of the birds out, and this must have delighted the Infante at the time and the audience listening to it, which must have been his retinue. Let's hear a sample of the opening. The elegant approach of La Ritirata works exceptionally well here. The bird songs are well articulated and allowed to linger so that they fall on the ear rather than race by. It's a perfect tempo for the bird songs. The movement itself goes on for a surprising length of time. It's almost 10 minutes long. There are a lot of droning notes and some attractive melodies, both supporting and separating episodes with the birds. All of the bird song episodes are pleasant, no wildness to them at all, like we're in an aviary of contented birds. I have to say, though, At almost 10 minutes, this does get repetitive. Boccherini doesn't change the birds' songs when they're heard. In the second half of the movement, Boccherini does give us some less repetitive, non-bird-like melodic themes that are worked out. At 7 minutes and 24 seconds, there's a scurrying section, and then we're back in the aviary for one last big section. Track 9, the third movement, Allegro, titled I Pastori e I Cacciatori. So we have shepherds and hunters, and that's a contrasting set of people. And we're going to hear some contrasting music in this movement. So Boccherini sets himself up well here. The movement seems to have been influenced by the tapestries of hunting scenes adorning the Infante's apartments. It is pastoral in atmosphere. The droning bass and middle strings recall a musette, which is sort of a lighter version of the bagpipes. The music mostly evokes a country dance, the shepherds, and at 35 seconds we have a galloping horse rhythm representing the hunters. This is a short movement at just over 2 minutes. Track 10, the fourth movement, Tempo di Minuetto. We get a minuet, and the elegance of the minuet is well evoked here. La Ritirata has the feel of an ensemble that one imagines would have matched the taste of the time that this music was composed. Again, everything is very neatly played. The rhythm is strong enough to evoke a dance feel, and at about 1 minute and 15 seconds, we get a trio section, and the minuet repeats at the end. Track 11, the last movement, the fifth one, Tempo di Prima. This continues directly from the minuet movement. It's still got a bit of a pastoral feel with its long-held harmony lines, but gradually gets more involved melodically. This movement has the most ideas packed into it of any in this piece. Let's hear the opening. We even heard that droning note at the end, indicating the pastoral movement. In 1 minute and 54 seconds, we come back to the opening energy and take a brief trip back to the aviary at 2 minutes and 23 seconds. The movement seems to be recalling elements from the previous 4 movements. The aviary lasts till just before the end, when we hear a melodic section that brings the piece to its final cadence. And the last work on the album is a pretty famous one, String Quintet number 60 in C major, titled Musica Notturna delle Strade di Madrid, or Night Music of the Streets of Madrid, composed in 1780, Opus 30 number 6, or G324 again. I wonder if I got that right. Okay. This tries to capture the liveliness of an energy of nocturnal life in the streets of Madrid. This really goes for description over form. Let's just hear some of the evocations here. Track 12, the first movement, Le Campane dell'Ave Maria, and this goes into the second movement, Il Tamburo dei Soldati, or the drums of the soldiers. So we hear religious life represented by the tolling of church bells at the beginning, with the Ave Maria part. Then the drum beat of soldiers. We hear pizzicato here for the first time on the album. It's effective as church bells, and this is a brief movement. It's all expression and no real formal structure. Let's hear the church bell sound that the pizzicato give us here. Okay, and I'm guessing that violin repeated note would be the drum of the soldiers. Anyway, we go on to track 13. It's a very brief movement at 43 seconds. We actually heard almost the whole thing. Track 13, Minuetto dei Ciechi, or the minuet of the blind beggars who are playing instruments on the streets of Madrid. The beat is deliberate, heavily marked, like someone's beating time so the blind musicians stay in time. The melody itself is pretty simple and stays in the ear through sheer repetition. Track 14 is the fourth movement, Il Rosario. which evokes the singing of rosary prayers. This has a more somber, sighing quality to it. The strings sound thin and far away, intentionally so, like the quietness of the sound rather makes it seem like we're hearing the prayers from far away in the church, in another room. It's a compelling effect. At 1 minute and 15 seconds, we hear the prayers close up, they quiet down again, and occasionally there are quick pizzicato gestures in the higher end of one of the violins. The movement gets a bit repetitive, as prayers do, but then we go to track 15, the fifth movement, Passacaglia, I spagnoli si divertono per le strade, or the Spanish people amuse themselves in the streets. The street songs in this movement are pictured as being accompanied by the strumming of guitars. Let's hear a sample. Some virtuosity there from the violin line. So the pizzicato strings indicate the guitars there, because you would pick or strum a guitar. So it has a lively rhythm. The pizzicati sound energetic. It's another brief movement at less than 2 minutes and appealingly evocative. The final movement, movement 6, track 16, Il Tamburo and Ritirata. Here we hear the military presence via the soldiers' drum beats and the march of the regiments as they beat a retreat into the barracks in movement 7. Now, that seventh movement, Ritirata, is directly inspired the naming of the ensemble performing on this album, so they took their name from that movement in this work. The violin plays a rapidly bowed, repeating note, as it did in the first movement to depict the soldier's drum beat. There's a sort of slow trudge to the rhythm, uplifting though it is. So we're going to hear the end of the movement, and really the end of the album, so that we can hear the soldiers arriving at the barracks. And there you have it. The soldiers are at the barracks. And that's the album. This is a good cross-section of some of Boccherini's most famous works for string quintet, which some have called his best works. The performances are all played neatly with great clarity of sound in the ensemble and on the recording. Boccherini's style is illustrative in 3 of these 4 works, with the opening quintet in B-flat major more of a formal work, and I want to say that's the one I liked the most. There's not much in the way of formal structure to provide deeper contemplation via harmony in the others. Rather, these works are a celebration of the life around us, or of the life around Boccherini at the time. La Ritirata err on the side of elegance and beauty of ensemble sound on this recording, and really that's hard to complain about. To achieve this, they forego some of the excitement the music could have put across, but it's no bad thing. The illustrations of the life of the time come up clearly and enjoyably. It's a lighter album of string quintets, well represented here by La Ritirata.
You know, I have several recordings of Boccherini string quintets, and I've heard some others, but I wondered just how many I've heard, because the notes say he wrote 114.
I think a lot of the same ones get recorded again and again, though.
Could be. I don't think I've heard these Spanish-influenced ones, and they were unique and really enjoyable. And the extra weight and presence of the bass was really fun and used well in the compositions. I thought the performances were nuanced with a lot of dynamic contrast, but like you say, the focus is on the elegance, and that comes through. There's a contrast of lyrical passages and more springy rhythmic sections in Boccherini's writing, and they take advantage of pointing out those contrasts And the recording is clear and rich with detailed string tones, so you can hear everything really clearly. Made it really enjoyable. I like this kind of music, especially in the morning, and it puts you in a positive frame of mind. So I recommend you listen to this one straight through.
Right. Yeah, for the rest of the day. And yeah, that sound is really, really beautifully recorded, resonant, rich. Sounded great in the mountain layer. Okay, our next recording. 2 piano concertos. Clara Schumann and Edvard Grieg. I really chose this one because of the Grieg concerto. It's one of the most famous concertos out there, and we haven't talked about it yet, so I figured this would be a good chance. This is played by Alexandra Dariescu. She's a Romanian-British pianist, and the Philharmonia Orchestra conducted by Tianyi Lu. She's a Chinese-born New Zealand conductor who's based in Europe. This is on the Signum Classics label, and it was released on August 16th. All right, now, for those of us who have been collecting CDs for some time, if we have the Edvard Grieg concerto, we probably have it coupled with the Robert Schumann concerto. That used to be a very popular pairing that new pianists would put out, and they'd record both of these works. Now, both concertos, by the way, are in A minor, and Robert Schumann's was too. We've already heard the Clara Schumann Piano Concerto on Beatrice Rana's recording for Warner Classics, where she was accompanied by the Chamber Orchestra of Europe, conducted by Yannick Nézet-Séguin, and that was back on February 13th, 2023, on episode 102, Master Keys. We're on 179 now, right? So this is a while back.
Yeah.
And I loved that album and saw the program as a musical love letter between Clara and Robert, and I really liked the idea that they were sort of speaking back and forth to each other through their music, which I guess they actually did. And that came out at around Valentine's Day, February 13th. It was the day before Valentine's Day, around the time it was released. So Robert set his piano concerto in A minor because he wanted to acknowledge Clara's concerto, and he even quotes from it too. This time we hear Clara Schumann's concerto paired with Edvard Grieg's, which as I said, we're incredibly hearing for the first time on this podcast, although I do go for out-of-the-way sort of recordings more often. And plus, this hasn't been being recorded all that often lately. So this is a good opportunity to hear it. It is a work I really love, and it's programmed here because it's the first romantic concerto that Dariescu played with a professional orchestra. This is usually paired with Robert Schumann's concerto, as I said, but this is a nice way to get away from that pairing. It's pretty interesting. Okay, a little background on the Clara Schumann concerto, which might be a little less familiar. It's in A minor. It's her Opus 7. It was composed 1833 to 1835 when Clara was 14 to 16 years old.
Wow.
So we're talking like Mozart style, like virtuosity here. And the 1830s were the golden age of the piano. It was sort of like what the 1960s were to the electric guitar. Chopin, Liszt, Mendelssohn were all in Paris at the time. And Clara Schumann was one of the great pianists, would come to be one of the great pianists. She already really was, but she was a teenager here. When she performed this concerto, it was conducted by Mendelssohn, who was already a big star himself. Robert Schumann also was no slouch at the keyboard until he injured his hands and turned completely to composing, with Clara championing his work. In fact, the reason Robert's highly innovative and very romantic era-inspired piano works are famous today is because of Clara. She played his works and made them popular. They were not easy works to listen to at the time. They were very new. New technologies brought out bolder, brighter sounds in a wider range, not to mention more nuance and quicker key action. This concerto, the Clara Schumann concerto, exploits a lot of that in its new type of virtuosity, which is especially astonishing since Clara herself was the age of a contemporary high school student when she wrote it. The three movements of the work are all attached so that the work sits between a concerto and a fantasy structure, similar to Mendelssohn's first piano concerto, which, by the way, is another work that we don't hear all that often, though more often than we've heard this one. Anyway, let's give Clara's concerto another listen. Always happy to hear it. It's a really great work. Track 1, the first movement, Allegro Maestoso, has a bold, romantic opening. Now, you're going to hear this and you're going to think, oh, this is romantic. I'm kind of familiar with this type of music. But you got to remember, this was very new in the 1830s. This was a new style of composing. This would have excited people. Let's hear the opening of this. Okay, so we got to hear the piano's entry in there with bold octaves, and we heard that bold romantic opening too. The romantics, with the exception of Chopin, were all inspired by Beethoven and his really dramatic music. The rhythm is clearly etched by Tianyi Lu, the conductor, and the piano's entry comes across with the necessary boldness. I have to say this movement is coming across a bit on the slow side, though it has excellent clarity in the sound. Dariescu's playing of her first full theme is beautifully taken, and I'd like to sample that. A lot of poetry in that line. The piano comes up on the recording with great clarity in all of the voices, and that's chiefly due to Dariescu's balancing of the lines. She gets a lot of solo space in the work. I would have liked more sparkle in the more complex solo passages, but what we get is clarity of line and a clear sense of where the harmony is headed. Dariescu is on top of all events in the score. A rather quiet passage leads gently into the middle movement. The second movement, Romance, Andante non troppo con grazia. This is really a title or a heading for a movement that we're going to see a lot in Clara and Robert's music. The movement is oddly an A-flat, contributing to its dreamlike quality, and the key was prepared in the first movement. It starts with the solo piano playing a harmonized arpeggiated pattern, sort of like in Chopin's Nocturne, Opus 9, No. 2, a very famous nocturne that students play. You know it, trust me. It's a lovely melody and sort of has me in mind of the middle movement of Ravel's Piano Concerto, which also has an extended section for solo piano, and I'm wondering if he was also inspired by this work. This works well at this speed. The emotion is allowed to drip out of the melodic line. Let's sample from about a minute into the movement. So the piano has the stage all to itself. It reminds me a lot of Ravel's Piano Concerto. Notice how the second half of this is a duet between cello and piano. The entry of the cello at 2 minutes and 35 must have been a surprise to audiences of the time. And Brahms, who was great friends with Clara Schumann, especially in her later years, would do something similar in the third movement of his second piano concerto. So this youthful work has had a lot of influence, despite the fact that it hasn't been played much until recent years. The rest of the movement has the cello playing the theme as the piano decorates. It's an interesting decision for Clara as soloist to take attention off herself for such a large part of the work, but it is very moving. The piano brings us to the third movement, which is marked Allegro non troppo. This is track 3. This was the first movement to be written, and it's as long as the previous two movements combined. It's got an immediately appealing rondo theme. Let's hear it. Well, that's some pretty impressive virtuosity for a 16-year-old girl to be playing.
Yeah.
No less for a modern concert pianist. Again, Dariescu focuses here on the contours of the melody, not bringing much in the way of fireworks, which are present in the writing. She seems to prefer a more thoughtful approach. This slows down quite a bit at 1:37, and I have to say, I think it's too slow here. Tension slackens. There is some lovely trading of themes between the piano and winds in the second minute. The rondo theme comes back in the third minute, and we get a lot of left-hand detail in Dariescu's performance, which turns out to be very appealing, a subtle feature of the work that can easily be overlooked. The next section is also highly lyrical, with impressive writing for inner voices, and it strikes me how incredible it is for a 14 to 16-year-old to provide all of this detail. The theme is back at around the 6-minute and 30-second mark, and after it's heard, we're off to a more explosive theme where Dariescu digs in a bit more, encouraged no doubt by the orchestra's strong accents on chords. At 8 minutes and 30 seconds, we get a pretty romantic theme on the piano with some echoes from the flute. At 9 minutes and 42 seconds, there's a sudden burst of chord from the orchestra and speed from the piano, though again, Dariescu is careful to allow every detail in these faster passages to register. It's almost like she's pointing to Clara's writing and saying, can you believe all these lines in here, all of this detail? It's really amazing. Overall, it's a gorgeous sound, and the piece wraps up beautifully and with a bit of fire. And then in tracks 4 to 6, we get to the Edvard Grieg Piano Concerto in A minor, Opus 16, composed in 1868. So this is much later than the Clara Schumann. Clara was still alive at this time. I think she actually met Grieg too. Track 4 is the first movement, Allegro molto moderato. So the opening is taken with a bit of drama, and I like the way the bass note at the end of the octaves doesn't stop the piece, as it often does. This is a very famous opening, so let's hear it. Then the orchestra plays the theme after the piano's introduction, and the piano gets it later. The orchestral part has a nice flow to it, and to be honest, both Dariescu and the orchestra sound more comfortable in this work than they did in the Clara Schumann work. Dariescu playing with poetry in her phrasing and really beautiful accompanimental passages. I've always loved the magical change into the approach to the second theme, so I want to sample that. She does this in an appealing way. The orchestral strings play the second theme. So that passage that I wanted to bring out retains its magic here. The second theme is caressed out of the piano, and there's a lingering quality to the performance that suits the theme well. At 3 minutes and 52 seconds is what I guess I'd call a big fanfare type theme that brings us back to the opening theme just after the introduction. At this point we're in the development. Each episode is brought out beautifully and given ample attention by both the orchestra and Dariescu herself. By 5 minutes and 24 seconds, we're hearing the opening theme again, and the material goes into the recapitulation. At 8 minutes and 45 seconds, the piano solo cadenza begins. Dariescu keeps it poetic and contemplative at the opening. She's sensitive with the tone, achieving a very quiet pianissimo that builds up evenly and impressively back to the opening theme, played with scales for dramatic effect between phrases. There's some impressive virtuosity here too, and I'd like to sample this as well. The orchestra comes in to end the section with a cadence, then adds a coda that allows the piano to let us hear the introduction again. This was an enjoyable performance of this movement. Track 5, the second movement, Adagio. Hearing this paired with Clara Schumann's concerto draws out the similar dreamlike feel of this middle movement. Grieg gives the pianist more rhapsodic material though, so the strings come in with admirable moody cloudiness at the opening. The piano enters gently at the 2-minute mark with a lovely tone that builds up to a mezzo forte dynamic. We hear a new piano theme at 2 minutes and 53 seconds. I'm going to sample that because I thought it was really nice. There's a lot of poetry in Dariescu's playing in this movement and this work in general. There's a nicely taken false cadence at the 5-minute mark, beautifully timed by the piano. It should really come as a surprise, and it does here, even to those of us who know this work really well. The movement ends with a quiet glow. Track 6, the third movement, Allegro moderato molto e marcato. The main theme here, also a rondo, as in Clara's concerto, is inspired by a Halling dance, which is a folk dance of Norway, though it's an original theme, not transcribed from a folk song, and that would have to wait for the early 20th century with composers like Bartók and Vaughan Williams who went out and actually wrote these folk themes down and used them in their music. You can go to YouTube to see what these Halling dances looked and sounded like. Here we're hearing a pretty piano classical version of it. They're more sort of rustic, I guess, in their original guise. Let's hear the opening of the movement. There's impressive intricacy to the theme, requiring some virtuosity, and Dariescu exposes all of the lines clearly while keeping the theme sensitive and dancing. She's really very good at this, getting into those inner voices and having the listener hear them. This rondo movement leads to some gorgeous moments, including the evocative wind theme at 3 minutes and 8 seconds. Then the piano takes over at 3 minutes and 30 seconds, making it sound squarely in the Romantic era. Let's hear that. This section ends gently at 5 minutes and 30 seconds. There's a pause, and then the opening folk dance theme is back in the piano. At 8 minutes and 18 seconds, the dance comes back in with a new appealing rhythm, well outlined by Dariescu. She keeps the rhythm dancing. The quiet theme that we sampled earlier comes back in bold Hollywood-style orchestration in the 9th minute. It's that theme that ends the work, stated boldly and leading to a satisfying conclusion. And that's the album. I have to say, I thought the Clara Schumann concerto lacked drama and excitement here, but it provided beauty of tone and phrasing, as well as a detailed hearing of the inner voices of the work. The tempo overall was on the slow side, allowing these subtler qualities to come out, and I'm guessing that's what Dariescu is after. She wants to make sure you hear every detail of this work. Nevertheless, I much preferred Beatrice Arana's performance from the 2023 Warner Classics release that I mentioned in the introduction. Actually, maybe they're both good to hear side by side. They're both different approaches to the work. The Grieg, on the other hand, is an impressive performance. It's performed with the same clarity as the Clara Schumann work, but it has a more comfortable overall feel to it, indicating that Dariescu and the orchestra are more familiar with the work. Dariescu brings real poetry to the work, even if she forgoes some fire in order to achieve this. There are so many great performances of this work that you may as well just pick your favorite pianist if it's really just the work that you're seeking. I personally love Stephen Huff's 2011 recording with the Bergen Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Andrew Litton on the Hyperion label, which is programmed with Franz Liszt's 2 piano concertos, which is also an interesting program. But I thought this recording by Alexandra Dariescu was worthwhile.
I thought the Schumann performance was measured and reserved in comparison, in a good way.
Yeah.
I enjoyed Dariescu's clear articulation, and I liked the lilting phrasing in the third movement. In contrast, the Grieg was really dynamic. Yeah. I was a little bit worried because this is kind of iconic, especially that opening. But then she really served it up, and the orchestra matched the piano for real dynamic climaxes. So that was a really good performance. Like you say, it's not a pairing that we're used to hearing, and so there's kind of a level of stepping up in the intensity, but that's okay. The recording's slightly on the dry side, I felt, but it does have very good clarity, and the balance between the piano and orchestra is really good. You can hear all the parts in the instruments in the orchestra very clearly. That comes out in nice balance with the piano. So I enjoyed the performance, and the recording was fun to listen to.
Yeah, you could really hear that she has a place in her heart for the Grieg concerto because, as she mentioned in the notes, it was the first work she played professionally with an orchestra. So, and you could hear that. It really does sound like something she really loves. It's a good performance. All right, moving on to our third classical album, the contemporary one. This is by a composer by the name of Ektoras Tartanis. He was born in Stuttgart, Germany, to Greek parents. And the album is called Mystic Encounters, Chamber Music Works. And this features the artists Irina, Jae-Eun Park, I hope I got that right, the soprano, Michael Borth, baritone, Susanne Keck on the bassoon, and Paul Drouet on the piano. Now, Paul Drouet is going to be the main performer throughout. We hear the piano on each track. Okay, Ektoras Tartanis, a new name for me, I'm sure for the listeners as well. Tartanis writes in his notes that mysticism is the link between Greek mythology and Romanian-born German-speaking French composer Paul Celan's poems. And that's where we get the title and overall theme of the album. The 2 song cycles on this album are all set to poems of Paul Celan, and the 2 instrumental works are inspired by Greek mythology. Greek mythology and philosophy formed the foundation of Tartanis' worldview and his intellectual background, and that's all I needed to know in order to want to hear this album. He says the Greek myths and legends are not simple stories, but rather a code that needs to be deciphered, over which one can meditate for years in order to achieve a deeper understanding of the world and human nature. And by the way, listeners, if you want a book to read that's going to really crack your skull open, but it's really rewarding, a book by Roberto Calasso called The Marriage of Cadmus and Harmony, which examines the Greek myths and their variations and kind of gives sort of a sort of essay on why they would be different and what might have changed in the society to make them different. It's absolutely fascinating and really just kind of rocked my world when I read it years ago. And in fact, I should probably read it again because it's not an easy book to understand really, but it's pretty fascinating. Tartanis says his music, like these stories, aims to reveal a deeper level of understanding in giving birth to the meaning of the underlying myth and bringing it emotionally closer to the listener. And I think that's a key point there, the emotionally closer to the listener and a deeper level of understanding. He's trying to do that with his music. Let's see if we can pull anything out of this. The first track, the first piece, is called The Lost Nereid. This is his first sonata for piano solo, played by Paul Drouet. Nereids were sea nymphs who beguiled people with their songs and could make the sea storm or pacify. Tartanis wonders how a Nereid song would sound if she had lost herself from that archaic time to the present day. How would her song sound in the turbulent world of ours in which aesthetic values, if they exist at all, are entirely subjective? What feeling would it evoke, and what lost beauty would it want to remind us of? Now, his description here reminds me of all of these whales that are now attacking yachts that we're hearing about. Maybe Nereids have something to do with that. Who knows? Anyway, just throwing that out there. Anyway, this piece has a rather watery opening, starting low in the piano and featuring swirling arpeggios that work their way up to the keyboard. It's very appropriate for a Nereid. Let's hear the opening. Paul Drouet's pacing here is deliberate and clear, and I find this helpful in following this work. There's a bit of the quality of Ravel's Ondine to it from his Gaspard de la Nuit, which is also about a water nymph, though a more sinister one. Certain more thematic notes are made to stand out via accents amidst the arpeggio's swirl. Like the water itself, it comes across as formless, though there is a progression to the musical work. It's heading to some kind of climax. There's a sort of a resolve at 2 minutes and 50 seconds where the music suddenly calms. It quickly builds up again via a crescendo to a more dramatic section in the 3rd minute, but we're soon in the intriguing lower end of the piano again, where Tartanis evokes the power of the deep via some bass-heavy figures in the piano's low end. Another episode in the high end occurs, and we're back to calmer triplet textures in the 5th minute, which I'd like to sample. It's the prettiest part of the work, and I think I want to show you some of the contrasts that we hear in this work. And these build via a crescendo to a crisis in the bass end, which breaks up into watery figures like those we heard at the beginning. The piece continues like this until it reaches a long sustained note that's allowed to fade at the end of the piece. And let me tell you, when we're in the bass end of that piano, Paul Drouet brings the thunder. The whole room was shaking at the bass ends of this piano. He gets a really loud sound when he needs to. Okay, tracks 2 through 5, Fadensonnen, which is a Paul Celan word. He makes up a lot of words, and he writes in German, so you can do that pretty easily in German by just butting two nouns together, and you have this new word. And what Fadensonnen means is something like thread sons. So it's one of Celan's made-up poetic words. So the piece is called, subtitled For Lieder for Soprano and Piano on Texts by Paul Celan, and this is Irina Jae-Eun Park, the soprano. Tartanis says that Paul Celan's poetry wants to be transcended and demands an overcoming of our narrow and square understanding of the world. The poems seek breadth and depth, tell us about the unknown and unexplored, and bring us closer to exactly that. Tartanis seeks to shape the musical dimension through music. I hope I'm saying his name right. It might be Tartanis, but there it is. Okay, track 2, song number 1, In den Geräuschen, which means in the sounds. I can't explain what any of these poems are about. They're seeking transcendence, as Tartanis says, and they seek to give the mind unexpected images through word combinations and made-up words. The song is slow with a ponderous piano line. Irina Jae-Eun Park has a tone with a bit of weight to it. Pronunciation is clear. The vocal line is as ponderous and mysterious as the piano part. Let's give this a sample. The second song is called Auf überregnete Fährte, or On a Rainy Trail. This features sustained piano chords, which the soprano sings over. There's an outburst in the piano before the third line, ending in a rapid trill, which the soprano continues to sing over. Let's hear a sample of this.
Auf
Okay, I'll get out there because it's a very short song and only 1 minute long. The piano line leaves the soprano's voice very exposed, so this is pretty impressive singing by Park here. The piano goes back to its chords at the end and the piece ends that way. Track 4, the third song, Du warst mein Tod, You Were My Death. This has a pretty romantic piano line. It comes across as a German lieder, lyrical in its vocal line. The ending is the only thing to let you know this is a contemporary work, as it goes deep into the piano's low end. And the fourth and final song of the set is on track 5, Zur rechten Wer, to the right, Who. This starts dramatically and is histrionic in approach. Both soprano and piano are excitable. The middle of the song gets stormy, as if the piano were a disturbed sea that the soprano carefully and steadily navigates. The piano has 2 sections with repeating chords, and this song ends with the second of those sections. Tracks 6 through 13 is a set of songs called Atemwende, and again, this is another sort of made-up word, breathing change it means. 8 lieder for baritone and piano after texts by Paul Celan, and here the baritone is Michael Borth. Now, the first song is called Fadensonnen, and if that sounds familiar, that was the title of the 4-song set that we just heard, but they just didn't use that poem in that set. Anyway, it means thread sons, to remind you. This features some plucking of the strings or a prepared piano. I'm going to sample the entire beginning of this.
Der grau schwarzen
That might be Drouet's hand in the piano muting the notes. The vocal line moves slowly, and Michael Borth brings great clarity to the text and richness to his deep tone. There's sensitivity there, too, at 1 minute and 21 seconds especially. This is a nice poem, sort of going beyond the everyday. There are still songs to be sung beyond people. Track 7, the second song, In den Flüssen, or From the Rivers. This starts with harp-like arpeggios from the piano, and the baritone sort of rides the piano's waves with a steady vocal line and tone. Let's hear a sample of that. The baritone, Borth, is exceptionally well recorded, up close and with a rich, resonant voice. Now, the baritone voice is very big and commanding, and yet he gets a lot of tenderness out of it too when he softens. It's a really nice sort of contrast. The piano gets into sustained trills by the minute mark, but arpeggios are the main approach here. Track 8 is the third song, Heiligkeitshunger, or Hunger for Holiness. The translation calls this brightness hunger, but heilig is holy, and I got that from Google Translate, so there you go. The baritone sings softly as the piano plays harmonized scale figures. Borth shows a lot of range, both in his reach and in dynamics. He gets a lot of feeling into this performance. By the climax, he's really singing fortissimo, then the piano quietens and brings the piece to an end. Track 9, the fourth song, Hohes Lebensgehöft, or Hollow Life Farm. There's a sort of appoggiatura chord starts the piece and repeats while the baritone sings above. I want to get a sample of Borth's more sensitive side, so I'm going to sample this. Track 10, the fifth song, Ein Dröhnen, a roar. I like the poem here. It goes, a roar. The truth itself has entered among the people, right in the middle of the metaphor flurry. So some clarity in the middle of all the nonsense, in other words. The piano plays racing patterns as Borth sings with a bold, heroic tone, and the piano brings it to a surprising end. Track 11, song number 6, Schauffäden, Sinnfäden, seeing threads, meaning threads. This starts with a soft piano pattern. I like the overall feel of this. The opening has a bit of a drunken feeling from Borth, followed by an impassioned outcry in the third line. Borth gets even bolder at 1 minute and 30 seconds. Paul Drouet on the piano playing his expressive part. The piano part is rather creative here. It changes a lot. Track 12 is the seventh song, Als uns das Wasser anfiel, when the waters attacked us. A rapid repeating pattern slowly climbs the keyboard, sounding watery. We're getting a lot of water on this album from the piano. Borth's singing is excellent here as well, but in this particular song it's Drouet's piano part and his performance of it that's drawing my ear. It seems to carry much of the expression in this particular song, so let's sample a little bit of this.
mir kam als Wasser.
And finally, the final song, track 13, Einmal da hörte ich ihn, or Once I Heard Him. Open chords sounding bell-like start this song. The piano part again has some interesting details, including a quietly played repeating note at the very high end, repeating at times. Borth sings sensitively and with reverence here. He's got a rich voice and interprets these works well, making them an enjoyable and really rather enlightening listen. Tracks 14 through 16 are the final work on the album, called The Horai. This is a sonata for bassoon and piano, and Susanne Keck is the bassoonist. The Horai, in Greek mythology, were constant companions of Aphrodite, goddess of beauty. Horai means hours, so the hours. Their names display qualities that are directly linked to beauty or reveal that divine beauty to us humans. Each of these movements is named after one of the Horai, and track 14 is the first of them, Eunomia, and her name means good law. The piano plays a quick arpeggiated figure, landing in the bass and letting that note ring. The bassoon comes in mid-range right away and plays a melody, and this is a very interesting opening. Let's hear it. There's something rock-like and unyielding about the characterization of Eunomia here. The piano gets the main line next, we heard the beginning of it, and while he plays, the bassoon is in his low, reedy end, sometimes sounding hauntingly like a human voice. An interesting modal scale is being used here. The piano brings some bass thunder in the second minute as the bassoon proclaims its line. The bassoon has a spoken quality to it. It feels like this track is breaking through from the heavens, laying down the law, I guess. We get a sense of power from the writing and from the piano's overall sound, as well as from the use of the throatier range of the bassoon. I rather like the fact that Tartanis is getting a lot of otherworldly expression from the bassoon without using any extended techniques, just the bassoon's natural tone. At just before the 5-minute mark, the music pauses, and a new section starts after the silence. It builds to a crescendo, again with thundering bass from the piano. Then the piano gets a rather pretty, trudging modal line that the bassoon eventually plays a straightforward melody over in the 7th minute. I like the clarity of this performance. Even the thundering piano is caught with dimensionality and clarity. Track 15, the second of the Horai, this is Diki, or Justice. The piano begins with rapid piano patterns cascading everywhere, and the bassoon comes in seemingly not quite in the same key. It sounds rather removed from the piano tonally, lightly clashing. And this could be, I said not the same key, but it's probably the notes of the mode that are being used that sort of separate the two instruments harmonically. The bassoon line actually gets a little comical with its staccato notes in the first minute. Let's hear this from the first minute so we can hear that bassoon line. Oof, powerful, loud, and a really strongly marked rhythm there too. There's a real pulse to this. The piano goes back to a rapidly arpeggiated repeating pattern, and the bassoon plays with more legato. Keck shows a lot of virtuosity in this particular piece, and some interesting tone as well. She's able to color the tone in interesting and often amusing ways. The last minute of the work features the bassoon pretty much playing solo, with the piano occasionally commenting with sharply articulated staccato chord rolls. The piano then comes in to accompany at the end. Track 16, the third and final of the Horai, Irini, or Peace. This starts with explosive, clanging, bell-like sounds from the piano. Not really what you would think of when you think of Peace. The bassoon blends in here and holds a long low note once the piano stops. Much of this is in the low end. Let's hear this big opening. Okay, so I made this joke about, this not sounding very peaceful, but we have to remember we're in the presence of a deity here, so bigger than us and sort of imposing. The piano then plays an extended trill followed by chiming chords, which the bassoon responds to. The piano is pretty busy covering the tonal floor with rumbling patterns as the bassoon plays in a similar range. Keck gets a more lyrical line at 3 minutes and 43 seconds, which he plays sensitively. And Drouet's way with the quieter chiming chords here is enchanting. Just at the 5-minute mark, there's a surprising prepared piano sound with a metallic ring to the attack. It's only heard once, then the piano is back to its chords, which the bassoon responds to, extending its line. The bassoon ends the work with a climbing pattern from low in the instrument. This is a really interesting movement, really, and that ends the album. This album is all pretty compelling, and highly listenable, too. I was mostly drawn by the ancient Greek themes in the opening and closing works, and I thought the use of modes in the Horai was particularly effective, the two instruments often not blending but standing distinct from each other, partly because of timbre. Pianist Paul Drouet is the common denominator in all of these works, and he plays with commitment and a deep understanding of these scores, which require some virtuosity too. This is a notable achievement for new music, which often takes time for musicians to get a deep understanding of. In fact, all of the performances on this album serve the music well. Tartanis was in good hands with the artists heard here. So here we have a composer whose music is very listenable, yet brings some explosive expression and drama to his scores, and some of the starkness and intensity of the Greek landscape as well. The album is called Mystic Encounters, but this isn't the soft, comfortable mysticism we've become accustomed to in much contemporary music. Rather, it's something more intense, so I'd say this is an album worth seeking out.
Like you, I enjoyed the instrumental works mostly on this album. The songs just really weren't for me that much. The piano work sounds extremely challenging to play.
Yeah, they do.
I found that interesting, and it has this continuous flow of rippling sounds, especially from the start. Yeah. But it does get into a more romantic sort of character, and it has a lot of intensity to it. A very interesting piece. And I thought the bassoon work was interesting as well. Again, the piano part is very busy, and that's in contrast to mostly lyrical and legato bassoon lines. There is a busier section in one of the movements, but the piano part has a lot going on there. The bassoon works into the upper register a lot. There's kind of interesting tones produced, and it has an overall angsty mood to it that you highlighted in the samples, but I kind of enjoyed listening to it because we don't get to hear the bassoon featured on its own so much doing these kind of things. Rather, we hear the comic relief or something in an orchestral piece. So this was an interesting work. Okay, over on the jazz side, we've got 3 interesting recordings tonight, starting out with Elias Haslanger meets Mike Saylors. And this features saxophonist Elias Haslanger and trumpeter Mike Saylors. It's on Bandstand Presents label, and it came out August 16th. Elias Haslanger is a native Texan. He studied saxophone at the University of Texas and then at the Manhattan School of Music, and he received a master's degree in composition at Texas State University. He's collaborated with Alice Marsalis, He was the featured soloist for Maynard Ferguson's Big Bop Nouveau Band, and he's performed and recorded with popular artists as well, such as Christopher Cross, Asleep at the Wheel, Sheryl Crow, The Four Tops, and The Temptations. Trumpeter Mike Saylors was the final guest of our friends AJ and Johnny from the Same Difference Two Jazz Fans, One Jazz Standard podcasts for 2 episodes in May and June of this year. Yeah, we got to think about getting those guys on for an episode soon. Saylors is originally from Charleston, South Carolina, and he went on to attend the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, Michigan State University as well, and the University of Texas. In 2019, he joined the faculty of the University of Texas Butler School of Music, where he leads the Jazz Trumpet Studio. He's got a long resume as a sideman with groups such as Bobby Santabaria and the Multiverse Orchestra, the Captain Black Big Band led by Orrin Evans, the Jason Marshall Big Band, Stephen Feifke Big Band, and the Mingus Jazz Orchestra. He's also appeared as a featured soloist with the Austin Symphony Orchestra, the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, the Gulf Coast Symphony Orchestra, and the Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra. And he's also an arranger and composer. He's worked for Arturo O'Farrell and the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra. He's made arrangements for Lady Gaga's 2023 run of jazz and piano engagement at Park MGM in Las Vegas. And since 2017, he served as a copyist and editor for the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. So on this recording, Elias Haslanger on saxophone and many of the compositions, and Mike Saylors trumpet, and some original compositions as well. Rounding out the group, Ryan Hagler on bass, Daniel Dufour drums. We've got 3 pianists here, Andy Langham, Eddie Hobizal, who also did the mixing and mastering on the recording, and Ross Margitza, I'll point out who's playing on which tracks, and Charlie Kramsky was the studio engineer. The recording is going to start out with a Haslanger original one-hand clap. Things get off to an exciting start here with an energetic post-bop kind of tune. There's a 24-measure melody that starts and ends with just a horn line. It swings hard, but has a cool Latin rhythm change-up on the way, and Haslanger is launched into the first solo on the recording. Let's check out the beginning of this tune. And he really keeps the intensity going in this solo right to the end with well-connected lines. The horn line from the melody works as a transition to a trumpet solo from Saylors, so let's hear some of his playing too on this tune. And there's that horn line again, transitioning to a piano solo from Hobizal. You can really hear a Kenny Durham influence in Saylors' sound. His solo lines here cover a lot of range and show some really good agility, and Hobizal keeps the percussive energy going in his solo, getting back to a final run through the melody and a high note ending from Saylors. Track 2 is another Haslanger original history book. There's a 12-measure rhythm section intro with synced syncopated piano and bass lines. Haslanger comes in on the melody as Hagler switches up the bass to walking. It's a long melody with a nice arrangement, handing off to sailors, and then the horns working legato lines over the syncopated piano and bass. Let's check it out from where the sax comes in a little bit into the tune. Haslanger gets off to a solo first, making a jovial mood. Let's check out some of Margitsa's piano solo and Sailor's trumpet on this tune as well. Back to the melody from there with some vamping for the horns to improvise a bit more before joining up for the ending. Track 3 is a Mike Saylor's tune, El Marinero. It's a Latin number here. There's a 16-measure rhythm section intro. The horn melody is fun over nice throbbing bass from Hagler. It's a repeating 16-measure idea into a 4-measure final section. Let's check it out. Haslanger getting started on a solo there, working up to some angsty cries with some bluesy touches as well. And Sailor's solo works up some good harmonic tension on this tune, so let's hear a little bit of him here as well. And Langham follows with a piano solo, and Dufour gets some drum action too before the piano sets up a final run through the melody. Track 4, another Mike Saylor's tune for Nicole. It's a slow ballad. Saylor's opens it and hands off the melody line to Haslanger before returning for a section that gets harmonized lines. The harmonies have some surprises and implied bluesiness. It's slowly unfolding and takes about 2.5 minutes, and it's hard to capture in a short sample, so I'll leave you to check the melody out. Here I'll sample Langham's tasty piano that shows off a nice touch. Saylor's follows with a solo that has a delicate nature and nice control in the higher register. The horns are back together from the harmonized melody section. It's a pretty tune with a sparse atmosphere. Track 5, a Haslanger tune, That One Time. A drum roll brings in this 12-bar blues. It's got a fun 60s kind of Lee Morgan funkiness with sassy glisses and a drum click on the second beat. The horns split into harmony on the repeat. Let's hear it get going into the break for Saylor's solo. This solo has a nice mix of double-time phrases, bluesiness, and good harmonic tension. Haslanger gets some gutsy blowing and his solo, so let's hear some of his playing on this tune as well. Yeah, nice solo. Margitza gets a piano solo from there, and Hagler has a go on the bass before a couple final rounds of the blues melody with some extra vamping for Dufour to work up the drums at the end. Track 6, another Haslanger tune, Today's New Groove. The groove here is a settled loping bass and even clicky drum beat. Sailor starts it out with muted trumpet, and there's a harmonic surprise at about half a minute in before Haslanger joins in to harmonize the horn lines. Sailors has a solo with cool rhythmic and chromatic ideas, and Hopezal churns up some funkiness in his piano solo. Haslanger has some Michael Breckerish ideas in his solo on this one that has a really good arc to its development. After a return to the melody, the horns have some simultaneous improvisation action building up to the end. Track 7, Mike Saylor's Spheres of Influence. This is a really fun swinging composition with a cool structure. There's a 24-measure opening section with horn lines exchanging with Dufour's drums. The horn melody has harmonized lines. It's got a repeating 16-measure A section. Then the B section is split between horns and piano. It's actually two different sections, and the final return of the A gets an extended ending. I'll play an extended sample into hearing the start of that final section. Into the final section of the melody. Langham Sailors and Haslanger all have swinging energetic solos, and they pick up the melody from the B section together into an ending with a pause that builds up anticipation. Track 8 is the only non-original on the album. This is tenor saxophonist Clifford Jordan's Down Through the Years from his 1961 Starting Time recording that had trumpeter Kenny Durham, pianist Cedar Walton, and bassist Wilbur Ware, as well as drummer Albert Heath. It's an easy flowing tune with a repeating 16-measure melody section, and then a new section that transitions to a bass solo from Hagler that I'd like to sample for this tune. That's nice melodic bass playing with clear articulation. A horn line there in a section leads to lyrical solos from Sailors and Haslanger, and we hear the opening melody section once more and a final pretty ending. Track 9, Haslanger's Top Dog. They're going chordless on this one, so no piano. The horns and bass work the jumpy unison melody together, broken up by Dufour's drum fills. Let's hear it get going into solo exchanges from Haslanger and Sailors. Some extra harmonic freedom there to expand on ideas, but the interaction stays tight. And Dufour gets a drum solo spot on this tune, so let's check out some of his playing here. And back to the melody from there to wrap it up. And the recording is going to finish up with one more Haslanger tune. For the moment, it's a fresh sounding modal tune with an unpredictable melody. Let's check it out into the start of Haslanger's sax solo. And let's hear a little bit more of Mike Sailors on this last tune in his solo. Yeah, nice solo there. A little bit of hint of Freddie Hubbard ideas, I thought. Langham has a solo too before they get back to the melody and a faded vamping ending. So this is pretty much a meat and potatoes post-bop jazz album, but with USDA prime beef on the menu. Other than the one Clifford Jordan tune, it's all originals from Haslanger and Sailors, and the compositions have a lot of variety from boppy, swinging, Latin, blues, ballads, and modal tunes with different structures to keep you listening and thinking. The solos are inspired and expressive, with Haslanger digging in and Sailors often taking a lot of chances harmonically. Their interplay shows their friendship and enthusiasm, good piano solos and backing from all three pianists, and tight rhythm section work with Dufour and Hagler, who both get spots to solo as well. Great playing all around and a good time.
Yeah, and it kind of plays into, old jazz records that I remember, like, Duke Ellington meets Coleman Hawkins and that sort of thing. You have these two soloists come in and, just do this album together. I really like the idea. And it's that genre, really, too. The records tend to be pretty straightforward jazz, like you said, this one. It's very meat and potatoes and very appealing playing, too.
Yeah.
Sailors has like, a lot of tones when he plays. He has like a kind of gauzy sort of tone on the opening tracks, and then he gets brighter on track 5 that one time, and 9 and 10 top dog for the moment, and he even has a mute on one of them too. It's track 6, Today's New Groove. Haslanger gets us into some satisfyingly blue moments on track 4, which I really enjoyed for Nicole, and swings appealingly on the first 2 tracks. His soloing is on most part on the cheerful side, so I feel like they're two different personalities too, like sort of soloing sort of against each other. I heard a lot of contrast on this album. I think Haslanger's sunny open tone is in contrast to Sailor's sort of more gauzy tone. Like he's a little more laid back too, so they're kind of contrasting partners. The pianist changes from track to track, so you get something very different from each time there's a piano solo, a different touch, different approach. It suits the album well with its variety between and within tracks. And I thought this was very satisfying, full of great soloing, and yeah,
good energy.
Straight ahead, really good.
I challenge you to not like this recording.
Right, exactly.
And I'm going to say that about the next one, too. One I've been waiting for to come out, and I told Eric Jacobson that we'd be discussing it, and here it is, his new recording, Heading Home, on the Origin label. This came out August 16th. Eric Jacobson majored in music at the University of Wisconsin, Whitewater, from 1993 to 97. Since then, he's performed with Grammy Award winners Phil Woods, Benny Golson, Brian Lynch, Tito Puente Jr., and Eric Bennett. And he's been really active performing and recording. Back in episode 88, Horns of Plenty, we discussed his 2022 release, Discover, and really like that. And here, he's with his same quintet members from that recording. You can also check out a trio recording with piano and drums, different members, called the Affinity Trio, and they're recording Hindsight from last year. All of these are on the Origin label. So on this recording, Eric Jacobson, trumpet and all compositions, Jeff Bradfield, tenor sax, Bruce Barth on piano, Dennis Carroll on bass, and George Fludas on drums, produced by Eric Jacobson and Vijay Telesnayak. Recorded, mixed, and mastered by Vijay Telesnayak at Transient Sound Chicago, recorded on October 29th, 2023. The recording is going to get started with a tune called Survival. It's a hard bopping modal tune. The dangerous mood is set in the 8-measure rhythm section opening. 32-measure melody has a clear harmonic change in every 8-measure section. I like the rising interval horn lines in the 3rd section and driving drums from Flutus. Let's hear it get going into the first solo from Bradfield. Yeah, he keeps his phrasing smooth over some really tricky lines in this solo. Let's come back in for Jacobson's exciting solo on this one. He works in interval ideas with some staccato articulation, keeps the energy moving forward, and has some fun false fingerings too. Yeah, nice conclusion there. And Borth has a choppy and exciting solo too, really driving things with a percussive left hand into some crashing chords, and Flutist gets the last solo, driving it to a final time around the melody. A great start to the recording. Track 2, Three of a Kind, a waltz as labeled. The rhythm section gets a 16-measure intro. The melody is a repeating 24-measure construction, working to more legato horn lines at the end. Let's hear it get going. Bradfield solos first again. He's got speedy lines and a nice lilt in spots over the waltz feel. They bring it down soft and more relaxed for the start of Jacobson's solo, and he matches with lyrical, unhurried phrases spaced out nicely. Let's check out some of Barth's solo on this tune. How he takes that one idea he's working on down and then brings it back up, and he sort of slows it down before he moves on with something new. Interesting chord ideas too. It's back to a couple rounds of the melody from there, and then Flutist gets to work around the drums over some vamping before the horns return with final lines to the ending. Track 3, Manti Time. This one is a minor blues. The rhythm section takes a round, and then the horns go around twice on the melody. Jacobson has the first solo, so let's check this out. There's a nice relaxed feel on this solo and some really cool intervals in an overall melodic performance. And let's check out some of Bradfield's hard swinging solo on this tune. A nice mix of lazy phrases and speedy lines there. Borth gets a go too, with bluesy touches and snappy rhythmic ideas, and Carol has some neat double-stopped ideas and a fun bass solo as well, before a final run through the melody. Track 4 is My Love for Amy, a pretty ballad showcasing Jacobson's warm tone and lyrical playing. We'll only get to hear part of the 32-measure melody in a minute sample, but let's take a listen. Tone there. And he continues on with an improvised solo after the melody, splitting it up with a section for Borth before coming back for the ending, which is very nice as well. So let's check out the end of this tune. Track 5 is Sunset Suite. This is a tropical cocktail with a little bit of maiden voyage flavor and samba spice to it. There's an 8-measure rhythm section intro and a repeating 24-measure melody, and check out the crisp hi-hat sounds from Flutus. Barth gets the first solo here, and it's rhythmic and playful with chiming chords, and Jacobson keeps his solo snappy with varied articulation over Carroll's throbbing bass. Let's check out a little bit of that as well. Bradfield gets some more fluttery freedom as Barth drops out for a bit and he works up to a high climax on his solo. When they get back to the melody, Barth gets some more improvisations on the second time around before the horns return for the final section of the melody to end it. Track 6 is called Pause Time. It's another 12-bar blues here with a nice 60s style groove. Let's check out the melody. Jacobson takes his time to build up his solo on this one. Bradfield has some nice snaking through the harmonies in his sax solo on this one, and I really like Bruce Barth's sense of sparseness in his solo here and the choppy chords that work into two-hand figures. Let's hear some of that later on. And back to the melody with some final bluesy thoughts from Jacobson to finish it off. Track 7, You're All Right, The World's All Wrong. Nice sentiment. This is a happy sounding tune with an evolving 32-measure melody over some nice harmonic twists. Let's hear it get going into the start of Jacobson's solo. Bradford and Borth have swinging solos too, and let's check out some of the solo exchanges from the horns after the piano solo on this one before they get back to the melody. And the recording is going to finish up with the title track, Heading Home, and what better way to wrap things up, Mike, than with a bit of boogaloo.
Oh, yeah.
This could have come right out of a 60s Lee Morgan recording. There's an 8-measure rhythm section intro and a funky repeating 16-measure melody, so let's hear it. Bradford solos first, working things into some harmonic tension and then up high on the way. And Jacobson has some fun tension to resolve in his solo too, so let's hear one more from him on this song. Yeah, nice solo. And Borth lays out a fun solo too with tremolos and percussive chords here before they hit the melody for one final time through. I said the last recording was Beat and Potatoes, so this one must be post-bop barbecue. You know, when I was back in the U.S. last month, I went out for a bit of barbecue with a perfect combo. St. Louis-style ribs, pulled pork, and pulled brisket, and a side of coleslaw.
Wait, was that all in the same night?
It's all in the same night, yeah.
Wow.
Like that meal, this was the perfect recipe with no fillers. A good variety of all original tunes from Jacobson, hard-bopping modal jazz, a waltz, a couple of blues tunes, Latin, a pretty ballad, and a side of boogaloo. The quintet's playing is enthusiastic with lots of great solos from Jacobson, Bradfield, and Borth. Carol and flutist drive things along nicely, and what I like about Jacobsen's playing is his always musical solos and the fact that he's not afraid to take chances and paint himself into a difficult harmonic spot and then work his way out of it. I always like that about the great players like Freddie Hubbard, and that tradition still continues in players like Jacobsen.
Yeah, that barbecue meal you mentioned, I think it would take me at least 3 nights to get through all that. That sounds like a lot of food. But it took me one sitting to get through this album. I really liked it a lot. It was an album straightforward and very enjoyable, played jazz, just like the first one, like you said, in that way. But Eric Jacobsen plays well throughout. I think I liked him best in the ballad, like My Love for Amy.
Great tone,
because he had a
yeah.
lot of great tone, yes, sensitivity in the tone. And it's a very particular sound, too. Now, the thing that really drew me to this, I love Jacobsen, but Bruce Borth is a pianist that I really like.
Yeah.
He's very kind of intellectual in his playing a lot. He has a lot of ideas, and you often hear a lot of them at the same time in the form of like this complex rhythmic bedding with a melody over it. And he's often very rhythmically tricky in his solos. Like he'll start it out, and then it just won't stay that way. It's kind of, there are all these little hiccups in there, sort of just a new idea going rhythmically as well as melodically. Even in the bluesy pause time, he does that. I said Jeff Bradfield is a good foil for Jacobsen, often staying cool and smooth in his solos, leaving a lot of space. And he seems to listen to what Jacobsen does and goes in a different direction. So that seemed to be his approach to me, yeah. I liked George Flutis when he was at his splashiest on the first 2 tracks. He hits hard. And he also tended to be splashy under Bradfield's solos, too, which I thought was interesting. He keeps solid time for the rest. And this is an album, straightforward and high spirits throughout. I really liked it.
Really good stuff.
Yeah.
Waiting for the next one, Eric. All right, and our final recording, over to the Posi-Tone label with Art Hirahara's Good Company. This came out on August 16th as well. We've discussed a lot of recordings featuring Art Hirahara, maybe the most featured jazz pianist on the podcast. Most of those have been either led by him or with him as a sideman on Posi-Tone. Echo Canyon from last year was one of our best of the year picks for 2023. And this time we've got him in a unique trio instrumentation. This is featuring Art Hirahara on piano, Ron Horton on trumpet and flugelhorn, and we heard him in episode 146, Midnight Meditations, with his recording A Prayer for Andrew, that was on Nouvelle Records, a tribute to pianist and composer Andrew Hill, and we enjoyed his playing on that recording. And rounding out the trio here, Paul Bolenbach on guitar, of course, great guitarist, one of Joey DeFrancesco's original trio members, and we just heard him a few weeks ago on organist Brian Ho's Bridges recording. So an interesting combination for this recording, produced by Mark Free and engineered by Nick O'Toole at Posi-Tone. This was recorded February 11th, 2023 at Acoustic Recording, Brooklyn, New York, mixed and mastered at Woodland Studio, Lake Oswego, Oregon. There are 13 tunes here, so I may have to limit my samples mostly to 1 each so we don't go on too long. Recording's going to start out with a Bolenbach original Shambolic. And Bolenbach starts this out on solo acoustic guitar. Hirahara joins in, and Bolenbach takes the melody that gets joined by Horton. I can't fit all that in a sample, but I'd like you to hear the solo acoustic opening. It's a short melody once Horton joins in, and he's off improvising soon. So I want to hear a little bit of that. So we'll skip ahead to hear some of his lyrical improvised ideas. Bolenbeck for a guitar solo next. Hirohata has a gently flowing solo too, before Horton joins back in for a final melody section. Track 2 is an Andrew Hill composition, Laverne. This is from his 1974 recording Invitation on Steeplechase. This is a happy-sounding tune with fun interplay between the trio on the melody and a real bounce to the rhythm from Hirohata's left hand. All three members get enthusiastic solos. I'll sample the ending from where Horton comes in with some backing over Hirohata's improvisations back into the melody. That will give you a sense of the fun interplay on this tune. Track 3 is Ugly Beauty, Thelonious Monk's tune from his 1968 recording Underground. The intro is unique here with pitch-bending trumpet and guitar over Hirohata's rising lines before he takes it into the main melody. Let's check that out. Horton and Bolenbeck exchange melodic phrases, with Horton continuing on improvising with extended phrases, and Bolenbeck's solo is restrained and melodic. Hirohata's solo on this has a nice touch with space and gets some backing from Horton too, and Horton shines out the final melody line. Track 4 is a Horton original, Sintra Breeze. This has a really attractive melody from Horton, which he starts out and then passes off to Bolenbeck. The locking in under the trumpet lines from Bolenbeck's choppy chords and Hirohata is really tight. Here I'll sample from the return to the first section of the melody into Hirohata's solo a little bit into the tune. Some nice bass line ideas under there from Bolenbeck, and Horton follows there with a solo of agile, speedy lines Bollenbeck picks up Horton's final lick to start his own guitar solo, and Horton is back for a final time through the melody with more agile improvisations. Track 5 is Bollenbeck's Psalm. This has a really lovely trickling piano opening from Hirahara. Bollenbeck enters with lower register guitar figures underneath that. Let's check out the meditative mood of this tune. Flows on in rubato fashion, and Horton joins in midway with legato lines on top that flow to a sustained note to end the tune. Track 6, another Bollenbeck song, Song Line. This has a neat 6-beat rhythm that Bollenbeck gets going. Hirahara joins in with choppy left-hand chords and rhythmic right-hand lines before Horton is in on the flowing melody and continues on with improvisations. Hirahara and Bollenbeck have solos too. Let's check out some of the guitar solo on this one and the great rhythmic interplay underneath. Horton is back with some more improvisations before it slows to an ending. Track 7 is an Art Hirahara composition, The Shadowist. This starts with a melody of interesting synced movement of all three instruments that eventually get more individualized parts, still moving in rhythmic synchronicity. It then turns into a bouncy exchange between guitar and piano. Let's start about a minute in to hear that transition. Shifts into a guitar solo with nice bluesy tastes. Horton gets a solo too, and then Hirahara with some bassline ideas from Bollenbeck underneath before a more flowing melody section and a final, more synced movement phrase to end it. Track 8 is another Hirahara tune, Soho Down. This has a jumpy phrased melody played by all three in unison, with Hirahara gradually filling in more lines underneath. The three have an interactive improvisation with things getting into some fun chaos before the melody is resurrected. Let's jump into some of that craziness until you hear Hirahara bring back the start of the melody. Track 9, As Praias Desertas, a tune from Antonio Carlos Jobim. This was recorded by a lot of Brazilian singers starting in 1958, and guitarist Charlie Bird recorded it as an instrumental in 1965. It's a pretty Jobim bossa melody, given nice rhythmic treatment from Bolenbach's acoustic guitar under Horton's trumpet. Bolenbach gets part of the melodic line too. Let's check it out from the last trumpet melody phrase into Hirahara's solo from about a minute into the tune. Touch on the piano playing there. Horton has a trumpet solo with great melodic snappy lines too, and Bolenbach gets an acoustic guitar solo on this one. Track 10 is Art Hirahara's Everywhere All at Once. This has a synchronized start working into a trumpet melody that gets a lot of motion from Hirahara's walking bass lines underneath, and Hirahara solos first over chords and bass lines from Bolenbach, who gets the next solo gradually getting more animated. Let's check out some of Horton's solo on this tune, just over Bolenbach's backing before Hirahara joins back in. Track 11 is Ron Horton's Full Moon Over Lisbon, a gorgeous longing melody from Horton. It's in an AABA form with 16 measure sections. Let's hear the beginning of the tune. Bollenbach takes the B section, and then Horton returns with the final A, and then Bollenbach has a contemplative guitar solo. Hirahara has a high register ringing solo over the B section, and Horton solos over the final A, returning to one A section melody with a little coda ending. Track 12, Art Hirahara tune Drop and Drag. Hirahara sets a bouncy groove for a 16-measure opening with some improvisations from Horton and Bollenbach together. Guitar and trumpet work the 28-measure melody together in unison. Here I'd like to sample Bollenbach's guitar solo that really locks in with Hirahara's rhythmic backing and walking bass ideas. And a rhythmic drive lets up from there a bit for Horton's solo to get going, but it picks up drive again as it goes along, and Hirahara gets a solo too, with Bollenbach keeping bass ideas with his chords underneath. Once more through the melody wraps up the tune. And the final tune is by Art Hirahara, Home. It's a down-home melody here, shared by Horton, and some slide work it sounds like from Bollenbach. Let's hear the tune. There's a real longing quality to that, and Hirahara takes the next contrasting section. Bollenbach gets a solo section too, as does Hirahara, so let's hear just a little more of his playing into some inspired lines from Horton a little further on into the tune. And Horton connects it back to the melody phrase we heard earlier to finish out the tune and the recording. So 3 great musicians and an interesting trio combination here. There's a lot of variety in material, from monk pretty original melody songs, and even bossa nova. All three are great improvisers, but the real charm on this recording is the unique interplay that results throughout the tunes and solos. It's intimate, spontaneous, and most of all joyful, because you can tell they were having a lot of fun, and I think you'll have a lot of fun too if you give this recording a listen.
Yeah, the lack of the rhythm section on the album leaves the work to the piano and guitar, and that really kind of got me engaged in this. The entire texture winds up being inventive and interesting as a result. Hirohata plays with a light touch throughout the album. He's a versatile pianist, and you had mentioned that we've probably talked about him more on this podcast than any other jazz pianist. I think it's because every album he puts out, he sounds like a different pianist. He's really got a different approach each time. He seems to explore a particular way of playing that differs with each album, and it keeps me interested at least. The three of these guys together come up with a lot of interesting textures throughout the album, especially when they're off playing their own takes on the material at the same time, as happens in Drop and Drag. I was happy to hear Ron Horton on the flugelhorn so often on the album. It's a sound I don't hear enough of, and I'm kind of come to like the sound really due to the podcast. Thanks, Russ.
Sure.
Okay for that. I thought Paul Ballenbach's variety of sounds and approaches throughout was great. Yeah. I was listening mostly to him. He switches between acoustic and electric guitars and gets experimental at times. You know, that last track where he was kind of playing almost bending the notes almost like he was like in a sitar-like way. I thought that was really interesting. All in all, this is an album with some satisfying explorations of timbre and rhythm, sectionless rhythmic approaches. I found it fascinating.
Yeah, it was really interesting, something different, and hats off to Posi-Tone for putting out an unusual combination like this. And I was really curious to what it would sound like, and I really got a good vibe from the whole musical experience. So really interesting recording. All right, that's going to wrap it up for episode 179. We want to say thanks, as always, to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And now that I'm back in the mountain lair in Japan from the U.S. mountain lair and filled up on barbecue, we've got things lined out for next week as well. So what do we have on the classical menu for episode 180, Mike?
Well, I'm kind of reaching back a little bit to an older release because I want to talk about the arpeggione, like a cello-like instrument that's a bit forgotten. We know it from the Arpeggione Sonata from Schubert, but it was an instrument that was vying for its place at one time and just kind of became one of those instruments that people don't really play. So we have an album of pieces for the Arpeggione. We have a new recording of piano trios by Smetana and Schubert by the Trio Boemo, who have been making waves out there in their performances, and this is their first recording. In the contemporary category, the Australian composer Brett Dean has a full album of his works that we're going to talk about as well.
Cool. On the jazz side, there were just so many releases I wanted to get to from the second half of August, so I'm just sort of lining them up. These are kind of major, well-known players here, but I want to hear all these albums. I've actually started listening to them already. We're going to hear vibraphonist Warren Wolf's History of the Vibraphone on Cellar Live, Michael Deese's new Barry Sachs recording that's a tribute to Roy Hargrove called Grove's Groove, that's on Lecoq Records, and then Tom Harrell's Alternate Summer, which is on High Note. All three of those recordings came out August 23rd. I was really looking forward to that. Just some of the ones from August that I want to get to before we move into the fall releases.
All right, always up for a Barry Sachs album.
Yeah. So those recordings will be up on our playlist. That'll be up on Deezer with a link to it from our Facebook page a few hours after this episode is published, if you want to get listening to those recordings as we are throughout the week. Any final words for this episode, Mike?
I think I'm going to do a Fandango before bed. That's my final thought of the day.
Sounds like a good idea.
I don't know what a Fandango really looks like. I just know what it sounds like.
I know what it sounds like, yeah.
I'll have to check on YouTube, and then I'll try to imitate it, maybe.
That'll wrap it up for this episode. We'll be looking forward to seeing you again next week for episode 180. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.